For the last century, our understanding of the universe has basically been haunted by a ghost.
Yeah, that is a really good way to put it.
Right. I mean, we call it the singularity. And you see it pop up every single time a physicist tries to talk about the absolute, extremes of reality.
Specifically when we talk about black holes, that is where the ghost lives.
Exactly, because if you look at the reigning theory, general relativity, it paints this really dramatic picture. You have a dying star collapsing under its own gravity until it just punches a literal hole in the fabric of space-time.
And that is where the math just completely hits a brick wall.
Right, the equations just spit out an infinity and boom, we get the ghost. A point of, infinite density where all the laws of physics just stop making sense. It is just a rupture.
Yeah, and we are basically supposed to just accept that at the dead center of a black hole, reality just gives up entirely.
Which is wild.
It is the ultimate rug-sweeping exercise in modern physics, honestly. I mean, we actually use the term mathematical pathology to describe it.
Mathematical pathology. That sounds like a disease.
That is exactly how physicists view it. Whenever a theory produces an infinity, it is usually like a neon sign blinking that your theory is incomplete or maybe fundamentally flawed in that specific area.
Oh, we just ignore the sign.
Well, for lack of a better framework, mainstream physics has kind of treated the singularity not as a flaw in our equations, but as a physical, actual reality.
So we're essentially saying, the universe is just broken in those ways.
Pretty much, yeah.
But today, our mission for this deep dive is to look at a perspective that asks a completely different question. What if the universe isn't broken at all?
What if we have just been reading the blueprint wrong this whole time?
Yes, exactly. Because we are unpacking an incredibly dense, just totally paradigm-shifting manuscript today. It is by George James Dukas, and it's titled Transdimensional Unified Field Theory.
Or TDUFT, version 4.
Right, TDUFT. And the central premise of this work is just a massive, sweeping claim. I mean, Dukas proposes that a black hole is not a rupture in space-time at all.
Not an infinite point of nothingness.
No. He says it is, instead, a transdimensional knot, a highly structured, perfectly ordered entity.
And to really grasp how revolutionary that claim is, you have to realize that Dukas isn't just, tweaking Einstein's field equations here or there.
He's tearing it all down.
He is proposing a ground-up rebuild of how we actually understand mass, space, gravity, and even the vacuum itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if a black hole is a perfectly ordered knot, we first have to understand, the string it's tied from, right?
Exactly. We have to look at the foundational geometry of this entirely new universe model.
Right, because in standard particle physics, we are taught to imagine this sort of chaotic stage. Like space is just this empty void.
Maybe bubbling with some quantum foam, but yeah, mostly a void.
Right, and matter consists as this zoo of particles just zooming around inside that empty box.
Space-time curves and bends like a rubber sheet, sure.
But the vacuum itself is essentially just the empty room that the universe happens inside.
Right, and TDUFT fundamentally rejects that empty box concept.
Completely.
In this framework, the basic building block of literally everything is something called the phi shell architecture.
Phi shell. Like the Greek letter phi.
Exactly. The universe is not a chaotic void containing particles.
Yeah.
It is actually built on a rigid, infinitely recursive lattice of concentric spherical shells.
Spherical shell. That's right.
Everything in the cosmos is organized into these mathematically defined layers, and they are indexed by a number we call K.
Okay, wait. Let me try to visualize this for everyone listening. If we use, the classic Russian nesting doll analogy.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
So you have the doll in the very center, you open it, and there's another one and another one around that.
Right.
In TDUFT, the innermost dolls, the finite shells that are numbered K equals 1 through roughly 7, those are solid matter.
Yes. The text calls them filled states.
Filled states. And it literally says there is 1 particle per shell, right?
1 particle per shell. This is nuclear matter, exactly as we know it and interact with it.
Okay, so that analogy gives us a really good starting point for the filled states. Those inner painted solid dolls hold the structure we interact with.
But the nesting doll metaphor kind of breaks down when we look at what happens next, which is where TDUFT makes its first really massive conceptual leap.
Because the structure doesn't just stop at shell 7.
No, it doesn't. You don't just run out of matter and hit an unstructured empty void.
Right. As you move outward past shell 7, the shells continue indefinitely, but they become invisible.
Exactly. They are defined as empty geometric potential.
It is this infinite extension of perfectly structured empty space. I think the text refers to this as the D lattice,
The
right?
T lattice, yes. That is the vacuum structure of space-time itself.
So instead of thinking about empty space as just a blank canvas, you should really be picturing a rigid, recursive, geometric backbone made entirely of these empty Phi shells.
And to understand why that distinction is so unbelievably vital, think about how we transmit data. Mainstream physics treats the vacuum kind of like open air. Signals and particles just fly through it randomly.
Like radio waves bouncing around.
Right. But TDUFT treats the vacuum much more like a fiber optic cable.
Well, that makes sense.
The cable itself seems transparent, right? It seems empty of data until you actually shine a light through it. But internally, it has a highly engineered, rigid geometry designed specifically to guide that light perfectly.
So the empty Phi shells are literally the fiber optic structure of reality.
Exactly. They carry entropy and geometry. They are the scaffolding that allows the solid matter, those filled inner shells, to exist and interact across vast distances.
Wow, that just reframes everything.
Yeah.
It is like finding out the empty air in the room around you right now is actually a perfectly arranged microscopic scaffolding of invisible steel beams.
It is a profound shifting perspective.
But wait, if the very fabric of space is this rigid, infinitely recursive lattice of shells, how does gravity actually move through it?
That is the big question.
Because in the old model, gravity is just the rubber sheet bending under a bowling ball. But if space is structured scaffolding, how does a force like gravity operate across these nested shells?
Well, the manuscript brings up this concept of the dual nature of gravity to explain that.
And honestly, the math behind this dual nature threw me for a loop at first.
It requires a major shift in how we think about mass and influence. TDUFT argues that because the architecture of the universe is divided into two distinct types of shells, filled and empty,
Right.
then there must naturally be two distinct gravitational regimes.
Two different types of gravity, essentially.
In a way, yes. The filled shells, those inner solid states we talked about, they generate the gravity we intuitively understand.
The standard inverse square law field.
Right.
The classic 1 over r squared,
Yeah.
which for you listening basically means as you double your distance from an object, the gravitational pull drops by a factor of 4. It dilutes as it spreads out.
Exactly. This is the gravity that keeps our feet on the ground and the Earth orbiting the sun.
And it makes perfect geometric sense. The text explains that with one particle per spherical filled shell, the flux of the gravitational field just spreads over the surface area of that expanding sphere.
And since the surface area of a sphere grows by the square of its radius, the strength of the field dilutes by the square of the radius.
Basic high school geometry, really.
That is standard stellar and planetary gravity. But the empty shells, that infinite D lattice of invisible scaffolding, they behave in a completely different way.
How so?
They create a pure monopole behavior, which the text mathematically defines as having a 1 over r potential. Not squared, just 1 over r.
Wait, I really want to pull on this thread for a second, because this is where the logic gets a little slippery for me.
Sure, let's break down.
We are establishing that empty space has this intense, recursive geometric structure.
Right.
But we also just said it is empty. It has zero mass. So how can an empty, massless shell create any gravitational behavior or potential at all?
That is a great catch. To resolve that, Dukas actually pulls a concept straight from classical physics. Newton's shell theorem.
Isaac Newton?
The very same. Isaac Newton proved mathematically that if you are standing outside a solid, spherical shell of mass, the gravitational pull you feel is exactly the same as if all of that shell's mass were concentrated at a single, infinitely small point in the dead center.
Okay, so for the inner solid shells, the matter shells, from the outside they just act like a single point of mass at the core.
Exactly. That gives us our 1 over r squared drop-off.
Okay, but what about the empty shells?
Well, Newton's theorem has a second part, which is even more critical here. He proved that if you are anywhere inside a uniform spherical shell, the gravitational forces from all sides of that shell cancel each other out perfectly.
Oh, wow.
You feel absolutely zero gravitational pull from the shell itself. The vector forces just sum to 0.
Because the empty shells go to infinity, right?
Right.
So no matter where you are in the universe, you are technically sitting inside an infinite number of these empty Phi shells.
You are always inside the scaffolding. And the math in TDUFT leverages this beautifully. Because these empty shells, have zero density and you're always inside them, they contribute absolutely zero gravitational acceleration to the interior.
The infinite lattice just cancels itself out gravitationally.
Exactly.
So the empty scaffolding doesn't pull on you at all. The only thing doing the actual pulling is the core mass at the center of the filled shells.
Right.
But wait, if the empty shells sum to zero gravity, why does the text call it a 1 over r monopole potential? What is the potential doing if it's not pulling?
Think of it as the difference between the slope of a hill and the height of the hill itself.
Uh,
The acceleration, the 1 over r squared pull you actually feel, is the slope. You roll down the hill because of the slope.
Right.
The 1 over monopole is the potential. It is the underlying mathematical structure or the height of the hill itself. The D lattice carries this potential. It provides the structural geometry that allows the gravity of the core to propagate outward, but it adds no secondary gravitational field of its own.
I see. So it acts as a perfectly transparent medium for the core's gravity to just pass through unhindered.
Exactly. It is the fiber optic cable again.
So we have a localized knot of solid matter, those inner filled shells, radiating standard gravity, and it is perfectly encased in an infinite lattice of empty shells that holds the geometry of the universe stable without interfering.
That structural foundation is what allows us to finally address the monster in the dark.
The black hole.
Yes. We can apply this exact lattice geometry to the most extreme environment possible, the death of a supermassive star.
The great collapse. Because if the universe isn't a rubber sheet that can just tear, but rather this vast network of nested shells, what actually happens when a star runs out of nuclear fuel?
Well, the outward pressure stops and gravity just completely takes over.
Right. And Einstein's model says the star crushes inward infinitely, piercing the rubber sheet and creating that ghost we talked about, the singularity.
But TDUFT completely rejects that rupture.
Entirely. According to this theory, a black hole is a shell collapse state.
Yes. When the gravity becomes too intense, those inner, solid-filled nuclear shells, K equals 1 through 7, they can no longer maintain their extended structure.
They are forced to contract.
But they do not shrink into a dimensionless point. They shrink down to the minimal structural radius of the empty D-lattice shells.
They compress until they hit the invisible scaffolding, and then they literally just can't compress any further.
And Dukas defines this specific collapse through a highly specific mathematical threshold. He calls it the horizon coincidence.
Horizon coincidence.
Yes. In standard astrophysics, a black hole is defined basically by the Schwarzschild radius alone, the point of no return based purely on the object's mass.
Right, the event horizon, the sphere of blackness we see in those famous telescope images.
But TDUFT argues that a true black hole only forms when 3 distinct horizons perfectly align at the exact same spatial boundary.
3 horizons. Okay, break this down for me.
First, you have the coherent horizon. This is the region where a body's rotation actively defends its internal structure.
Okay, rotation. Think of like the Earth's magnetic field being generated by its spinning iron core.
Or a gyroscope remaining upright while it spins. Exactly. Rotation creates a stabilized field of organization.
So as the dying star collapses, its spin creates this outward pushing structural boundary.
That is horizon 1. Second, you have the fossil horizon.
Fossil horizon.
This is the maximum spatial radius where a non-rotating body can still maintain a cohesive structural influence right before its field just dilutes into a generic, featureless mass signature.
Okay, let me make sure I follow this. The coherent horizon is the structural limit defined by its spin.
Right.
And the fossil horizon is the structural limit defined by its static shape or density.
Exactly.
And what is the third horizon?
The third is that mass-defined Schwarzschild radius we mentioned. The genius of the horizon coincidence is that a black hole is born exclusively when the coherent horizon, the fossil horizon, and the Schwarzschild radius all converge.
They all hit the exact same number.
Yes. Radius of coherent equals radius of fossil equals radius of Schwarzschild.
They just snap together into one single mathematical boundary.
Right.
All the filled shells contract and lock into this perfectly aligned perimeter.
Which brings us to arguably the most radical implication of the entire manuscript.
Which is?
If all of physical matter is locked at this outer boundary, what is actually inside?
Well, general relativity says infinite nothingness.
But TDUFT says the interior approaches pure entropy.
Pure entropy.
Remember our shell index K?
Yeah, the shell numbers.
Inside the collapsed radius, mathematically, the shell index K approaches infinity. The interior is not an empty void at all. It is a perfectly ordered D-lattice of empty phi shells.
Oh, wow. It is pure structured entropy. It is almost like taking a balloon and shrinking all the physical rubber down to a microscopic skin, but inside, The air pressure, the empty scaffolding is infinitely dense and perfectly arranged.
Yes, exactly. It is not chaos. It is the absolute maximum of geometric order.
What's fascinating here is how TDUFT perfectly preserved the exterior observations of general relativity.
That is the beauty of it. From the outside, looking past this collapsed boundary, the gravitational field follows that pure monopole 1 over Aurour potential we discussed earlier.
So it looks, acts, and pulls exactly like a Schwarzschild black hole.
Right. If you throw a planet into orbit around it, general relativity still perfectly describes that orbit.
So when the Event Horizon Telescope captures an image of the supermassive black hole at the center of the M87 galaxy, the image we see, the shadow and the photon ring, is totally consistent with TDUFT from the outside.
The exterior observations are perfectly preserved. What TDUFT cures is the internal mathematical disease.
It eradicates the singularity entirely.
It replaces a broken infinite division by zero with a recursive geometric vacuum.
I have to play the skeptic here for a minute, though.
Please do.
Because as beautiful as this sounds, a universe of infinite nested shells, 3 horizons snapping together, replacing a broken physics concept with a crystalline vacuum of pure entropy.
It sounds good.
It feels a bit like theoretical poetry. And in physics, poetry just isn't enough.
No, it is not.
A theory needs hard math, and more importantly, it needs real-world predictions that can be physically measured.
Absolutely.
So how do we know this framework isn't just a clever mathematical illusion?
Well, the manuscript is acutely aware of that exact burden of proof. TDUFT provides a mathematical framework that is shockingly constrained.
Constrained how?
To the point where it basically forces itself to make testable predictions. Let's look at the foundational equation that governs this reality.
Okay.
The transmutative relation. D to the 5th power equals mc squared.
Okay, d to the 5th equals mc squared. Visually, that instantly reminds you of Einstein's E equals mc squared, obviously.
Correct.
Where energy and mass are 2 sides of the same coin,
Right.
but substituting d to the 5th power for energy implies something entirely different. I mean, d to the 5th, we live in 3 spatial dimensions and 1 of time. Where on Earth is a 5th degree of freedom coming from?
That is the key difference. In Einstein's framework, mass is just an object sitting inside the space-time coordinate system.
A rock in a river.
Exactly. But in TDUFT, mass isn't an isolated object at all. It is an action. It is the physical manifestation of a geometric constraint.
A geometric constraint.
The d to the 5th defines the spatial extension required to actually house that mass within the lattice. It states that mass is intimately bound to a 5-dimensional geometric extension of space.
Mass is the result of the lattice folding in on itself, the knotting we talked about in the beginning.
Yes. The 5th dimension here isn't a place you can travel to, like in science fiction. It is the mathematical degree of freedom that allows the transdimensional boundary between the empty D lattice and the filled mass shells to exist in the first place.
So a particle of mass literally defines a specific geometric volume of the lattice around it.
Precisely.
But the c in that equation is still the speed of light, right?
It is.
And TDUFT redefines the speed of light entirely, doesn't it? Because standard physics just measures c at roughly 299 million meters per second and just accepts it as a fundamental constant.
Right. It is just the universe's arbitrary traffic cop.
Standard physics has no mechanism to explain why light travels at that specific speed. It is simply an empirical measurement.
But Dukas derives an equation where c is an actual emergent property of the shell geometry.
Oh, wow.
The TDUFT equation for the speed of light is c equals 2 plus phi to the negative 1 plus phi to the negative 2 minus sigma infinity, all times 10 to the 8th meters per second.
Okay, wait, let's break that formula down because phi is the golden ratio, right? Approximately 1.618.
Yes.
We see it in sunflower seed patterns, the spiral of nautilus shells, the arms of galaxies. It is known as the optimal ratio for biological and geometric growth.
It is the most mathematically efficient way to pack structures together without leaving gaps or creating overlaps as a system scales to infinity.
And the equation dictates that the speed of light is derived from the integer 2 plus fractions of the golden ratio minus a term called sigma infinity.
Yes.
What exactly is sigma infinity doing in that formula?
Sigma infinity is an infinite harmonic attenuation series.
Okay, English, please.
It represents the microscopic drag, or the entropy, of the vacuum lattice itself. Because light is propagating through the structure D lattice, its maximum speed is dictated by the harmonic geometry of that exact lattice.
So the speed of light isn't a random limit. It is the physical manifestation of the universe's fundamental structural efficiency.
Exactly.
The golden ratio isn't just dictating how plants grow on Earth, it is dictating how fast information can travel through the invisible scaffolding of reality.
It is a massive philosophical leap, I know.
It really is. But does it actually work when applied to astronomical data? Like, does the math check out in reality?
It works with an accuracy that is very difficult to dismiss. The manuscript details how TDUFT utilizes these equations to produce what physicists call zero-parameter predictions.
I want to emphasize what zero parameter means for you listening because this is crucial.
It is.
In complex mainstream models, like the standard model of particle physics or big cosmological models, equations often include free parameters. These are essentially blank variables. If the math predicts a galaxy should spin at one speed, but the telescope shows it spinning way faster, you plug a number into that blank variable, like dark matter, to make the equation balance out.
It is a mathematical tuning knob.
Right. TDUFT removes the tuning knobs entirely.
Completely. The math relies purely on universal geometric constants, like the golden ratio. You cannot adjust the golden ratio to make your data look better. It is entirely fixed.
So if the theory is wrong, it will produce answers that are wildly, undeniably incorrect.
Exactly. Yet, using only these rigid geometric fractions, TDUFT precisely calculated the location of the sun's heliopause.
The heliopause. For context, that is the physical boundary, where the solar wind from our sun is finally stopped by the pressure of interstellar space. Voyager 1 and 2 crossed it recently.
Yes, and using the golden ratio scaling, TDUFT predicted that boundary to exist at exactly 120 astronomical units.
And what does the actual probe data say?
It perfectly aligns with our probe data. Furthermore, it predicted the Earth's magnetopause, which is the boundary of our planetary magnetic field, at exactly 10 Earth radii.
No way.
It even calculated the binding energy ratio of oxygen-16 to helium-4 at the microscopic atomic level with a 2.6% margin of error.
Wait, how is that even possible? How does the geometry of microscopic nesting dolls scale up to accurately predict the magnetic boundary of the Earth and the edge of the solar system without a single tweak to the math?
Because the scaffolding is completely recursive. If the entire universe is built on a phi-modulated lattice, then the harmonic resonances of that lattice will naturally dictate boundaries at the quantum scale, the planetary scale, and the stellar scale.
So it's the exact same math, just zoomed in or out.
Exactly. The math suggests that these distances, 120 AU, 10 Earth radii, they aren't random environmental accidents. They are the inevitable structural nodes of the d-lattice stabilizing mass within a local system.
Okay, so the geometry is incredibly robust. It stabilizes the solar system, it holds atomic nuclei together, and it can even contain the sheer localized entropy of a black hole at the horizon coincidence.
Yes.
But no physical system is infinitely stable under infinite stress forever, right? We have this transdimensional knot, a black hole, packed with an infinite density of pure entropy on the inside and bounded by a minimal structural shell on the outside.
Right.
What happens when that delicate ratio fails?
Well, every knot can eventually be untied. The manuscript outlines a mathematical threshold for this exact event. It describes the mechanics of the outward limit, or essentially the explosion of a black hole.
So black holes explode in this theory.
Yes. In this framework, a black hole is a temporary localized node. It possesses a very specific ratio of structure to entropy.
The text defines this as C sub k over S sub k approaching zero. Let's make sure we track the variables here for everyone.
Sure.
C sub k represents the structural fraction, the filled shells doing the containing on the outside. And S sub k is the entropy fraction, the infinite empty d-lattice shells pushing from the inside.
Exactly. So as the black hole ages, or under specific extreme conditions, the entropy fraction, S sub k, grows toward 1. This represents pure, uncontained entropy.
And simultaneously, the structural fraction, C sub k, shrinks toward 0.
Right. So the system hits a critical threshold where the containing boundary can simply no longer withstand the internal geometric pressure.
Dukas uses a really vivid analogy for this in the paper, the balloon analogy.
Oh, it's a great visualization.
Right, if you imagine the filled structural shells of the black hole as the rubber of a balloon. And the pure entropy of the infinite internal d-lattice is the air pressure inside.
Yeah.
As the structure approaches 0, the rubber becomes impossibly thin. As the entropy approaches 1, the air pressure becomes overwhelming.
And when the rubber can't hold the pressure...
The balloon pops.
Exactly. But the word explosion can be a little misleading if we picture, like, a grenade sending fiery shrapnel into space. The math defines this not as a kinetic explosion, but as a perpetual geometric extension.
Okay, wait. What is actually extending? If it's not physical matter blowing outward, what is moving?
The geometry of the lattice itself scales outward.
I see.
When the structure-to-entropy ratio hits 0, the knot loses its localized restoring force. The immense concentrated geometry of the D-lattice just unspools.
It unties.
Yes, the gravitational field strength decays as it expands, rigidly conserving energy. But the spatial extension of the shells pushes outward perpetually. The field doesn't oscillate or collapse back inward.
It simply redistributes its localized order back into the infinite background geometry of the universe.
That paints an incredible picture of cosmic evolution, doesn't it?
It really does. Because if a black hole is just a localized knot of geometry that eventually snaps outward and dissolves back into the lattice,
Right.
it fundamentally changes how we view physical creation itself.
So what does this all mean for creation?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If we aren't just pouring matter into an empty box, how does the knot form in the first place? How does physical reality actually emerge from an empty lattice?
This moves TDUFT from pure astrophysics into the realm of profound cosmology. Creation is not the introduction of external material.
Right.
Creation is an emergent localization of order originating entirely from the vacuum lattice itself. Mass is basically a structural phase change of empty space.
So the empty scaffolding folds up on itself, ties a knot, and we experience that knot as mass.
And to comprehend the mechanism of that folding, how you actually extract a dimensional knot from a null, unmanifested state, the manuscript introduces its most philosophical mathematical concept.
The eternum nexus.
The eternum nexus, yes.
The math behind the actual origin of form. And the equation itself looks daunting at first. It is n equals 1/2 alpha phi plus beta pi squared, which then equals phi psi times -0, which all equals pi squared.
Right. To decipher this, we really have to look at how Dukas treats numbers themselves.
Here.
He introduces the operator system.
Where numbers aren't merely quantities.
Exactly. They aren't just counting tools. They're literal states of being.
Standard arithmetic views a 1 as a unit, like 1 atom, 1 meter. But the TDUFT operator system views 1 as the geometric shell sector.
Right. It is the mathematical representation of resolved structure. It denotes spatial organization, boundary formation, and realization. When the math outputs a 1, it means a physical shape has successfully manifested.
So 1 is the knot. It is the solid existence of form.
Conversely, a -1 does not mean -1 atom. It represents the conjugate wave or entropy sector.
Okay, so entropy is -1.
It is the underlying dynamic flow, the propagation, and the inevitable dispersion that supports the structure. You cannot have the static geometry of a 1 without the energetic conjugate of a -1 maintaining the balance of the lattice.
So 1 is the sculpture, and -1 is the tension in the stone holding it all together.
Beautifully said.
But what happens before the sculpture exists? What represents the raw material?
That is the domain of 0 and -0. These do not represent absolute nothingness or a void. They represent the boundary source.
The boundary source.
It is the null state where the duality of structure and entropy is entirely unresolved. It is pure, infinite potential simply waiting for a geometric constraint.
Unmanifested potential. The clay before the sculptor even touches it.
Exactly. And the manuscript frequently discusses the geometric problem of squaring the circle.
Right, an old mathematical puzzle.
In the context of the operator system, squaring the circle is the literal description of physical creation. It is the exact process where the resolved structure of 1 emerges from the unmanifested potential of 0.
But wait, how does a 2D boundary concept like a circle or a square translate into physical 3D mass?
The transition occurs when a two-dimensional constraint, a localized point of infinite potential, is mathematically forced to resolve into a three-dimensional shape to maintain the harmony of the lattice.
Oh, I see.
The transdimensional effect is the lifting of that boundary into reality. The universe shifts from unresolved potential into a completed geometric state.
And the bridge that allows that state change, according to the eternum nexus equation, evaluates to pi squared.
Yes.
Which is wild. Because we all know pi is 3.14159, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. But in this theory, pi is doing significantly heavier lifting than just measuring a circle on a chalkboard.
Much heavier. In the eternum nexus, pi is the source invariant.
Source invariant.
It is the constant that survives the translation between pure entropy and resolved structure. It encodes the fundamental closure law of the universe. Without pi, the lattice could not fold into closed spherical shells at all. Pi is literally the generator of geometric emergence.
It is the code that commands the 0 to become a 1.
Exactly.
I love visualizing this as an accordion of creation. The universe uses the golden ratio and the pi invariant to compress the lattice, folding it inward to tie these transdimensional knots. Stars, planets, black holes, even our own bodies. And eventually, through the explosion limit, the accordion expands, the knot unties, and the structure unfolds back into the vast D-lattice.
It creates a mathematically closed, perfectly unified harmony. Everything from the birth of a subatomic particle to the death of a supermassive black hole is governed by the exact same recursive geometric rules.
It is incredibly elegant. But, and this is a big but, this unified harmony is so far removed from how modern experimental physicists are actually operating today.
It is night and day.
Which brings us to a really blistering critique, detailed in the manuscript, regarding how mainstream science is currently attempting to study black holes.
Yes, Dukas explicitly targets a highly publicized experiment, the 97,000-run sonic black hole experiment.
It is a profound disagreement on the basic nature of reality. For context, a few years ago, physicists created a Bose-Einstein condensate in a lab, basically a supercooled fluid, and they accelerated its flow until the fluid was moving faster than the speed of sound within that specific medium.
So if a sound wave tried to travel upstream against the current, it couldn't. It would be swept backward.
Right. They created an acoustic event horizon, a point of no return for sound.
And they observed microscopic fluctuations at this acoustic horizon, and the mainstream physics community completely celebrated it as a lab-created analog for Hawking radiation.
Which is the theory that true black holes slowly leak thermal energy at their event horizons, right?
Exactly. They used this fluid model to claim profound insights into the thermodynamics of actual spacetime.
But TDUFT argues this experiment proves absolutely nothing about black holes or spacetime. Why is Dukas so completely dismissive of it?
Because a fluid dynamic speed limit shares almost no mathematical or structural reality with a transdimensional shell collapse.
These are the same thing at all.
Not even close. A sonic horizon lacks a light-based boundary. It does not possess a fish-shell architecture. A fluid has a background container. It literally sits inside a lab.
While spacetime is the container itself.
Exactly. An acoustic horizon does not transition from a 1 over r squared mass field to an empty shell 1 over r monopole field. There is no D-lattice, no mass-defined horizon, and certainly no pure entropy interior.
It is like building a model airplane out of paper mache, blowing a desk fan on it, and then writing a research paper claiming you have solved the thermal dynamics of a titanium jet engine. The analogy is fundamentally, structurally flawed from step one.
The manuscript asserts that the observed radiation in the fluid is just the breakdown of an inadequate analogy. It is an artifact of fluid mechanics, not a profound revelation about the fabric of the universe.
I completely understand the critique, but as someone trying to weigh both sides fairly, I have to ask.
Go ahead.
If TDUFT rejects these analog experiments, how do we ever actually test TDUFT?
That is the million-dollar question.
Beautiful math and zero-parameter postdictions of the solar system are compelling, sure, but a theory has to make a forward-looking, falsifiable prediction. It has to tell us what to look for tomorrow. Does TDUFT provide a real way to prove it right or wrong?
It does, and it provides a prediction so intensely specific that it acts as a definitive binary test between general relativity and TDUFT. We can call it the killer claim.
The killer claim. I like that. What is it?
It revolves around the specific nature of the radiation escaping from a black hole.
Okay, standard physics, relying on Stephen Hawking's work, says that if you could see the radiation evaporating off a black hole, it would look like a smooth, continuous thermal spectrum.
Right.
Like the heat shimmering perfectly smoothly off a hot iron stove.
A completely featureless continuum of energy, but TDUFT dictates that a black hole is not a smooth, featureless rupture.
Because it's not.
It is constructed from discrete, mathematically defined recursive shells. Therefore, the energy escaping from that boundary cannot be a smooth continuum.
They have to have texture.
Exactly. It must carry the geometric fingerprint of the shells themselves. TDUFT predicts a discrete, phi-modulated emission spectrum.
Oh, wow. So instead of a smooth rainbow of heat, the emission should look almost like a barcode.
A barcode is a perfect analogy.
It should have specific, quantifiable spikes or gaps corresponding directly to the golden ratio geometry of the lattice.
And the manuscript is incredibly precise about exactly where these barcode lines will appear. It calculates the decay of the structural fractions, the C sub k values, and predicts that there must be detectable discrete Emission lines corresponding specifically to the shell fractions at k equals 8 and k equals 9.
Shells 8 and 9. The very first two invisible, empty d-lattice shells sitting immediately outside the boundary of the collapsed solid matter.
Right. The math states that the k equals 8 shell generates a structural fraction of about 0.001, which would produce a faint modulated signal.
Okay.
But the k equals 9 shell at a spacing of 0.00004 should produce a clear, highly detectable discrete emission line.
This raises an important question, though. How close are we to actually seeing this?
Well, the entire theory hinges on an astronomical observation we are currently actively waiting for.
The Event Horizon Telescope.
Exactly. The global array of radio dishes that gave us the very first actual photograph of a black hole. They are continually upgrading their technology. We're just waiting for them to achieve the spectral resolution necessary to read the light from that black hole with absolute precision.
So when they finally achieve that resolution, if they observe a smooth, continuous thermal curve.
Then TDUFT will face a massive, likely fatal contradiction.
However, if they look at the emission data and find discrete, phi-modulated lines at exactly the structural fractions of k equals 8 and k equals 9.
Then the ghost of the singularity is officially exorcised forever.
General relativity is superseded entirely.
Physics textbooks worldwide have to be rewritten from scratch to introduce the D-lattice. It would confirm that the universe is governed by the recursive geometric architecture of the transdimensional knot.
Man, this has been a staggering journey today.
It really has. We covered a lot of ground.
We started by discarding the broken math of the singularity, replacing it with the infinitely recursive nesting dolls of the phi shell architecture.
We unraveled the dual faces of gravity, the 1 over r squared pull of the filled matter shells, and the transparent 1 over r monopole potential of the infinite empty space scaffolding that surrounds us.
We explored the Great Collapse, witnessing how the coherent spin, fossil structure, and mass horizons snap perfectly together.
To form a boundary that encapsulates not an infinite void, but a state of maximum geometric order and pure entropy.
We even tackled the math that dictates reality. We looked at how d to the 5th equals mc squared frames mass as a transdimensional spatial extension.
And how the speed of light itself is dictated by the harmonic efficiency of the golden ratio. We saw how this math, devoid of any fudge factors or free parameters, perfectly mapped the physical boundaries of our solar system.
We followed the life cycle of the knot all the way to its expansion limit, watching the localized geometry unspool perpetually outward when structure finally yields to entropy.
We peered into the Eternum Nexus to see how unmanifested potential uses the pi invariant to literally square the circle and emerge into physical form.
And we ended on the absolute bleeding edge of observational astronomy, waiting for the Event Horizon Telescope to find the geometric barcode of shells 8 and 9 in the shadow of a supermassive black hole.
It is a profound, entirely self-consistent vision of a highly structured cosmos.
It is. But I want to bring this vast cosmic architecture all the way down to you, the listener, right now.
That is the best part.
Because the most mind-bending takeaway from TDUFT isn't just about giant black holes millions of light years away. It is about the room you are sitting in right this second.
According to this theory, the empty space between you and your speakers, the air between your fingers, is not an empty void.
It is a rigidly engineered, infinitely precise geometric lattice. You are sitting inside the mathematical accordion of creation.
The fish shells and the D-lattice are the invisible scaffolding holding your physical reality intact at this exact second.
Which leaves us with a final lingering thought, a question to carry with you after this deep dive is over. If all matter, including the atoms in our bodies, the neurons in our brains, if everything we physically are, is simply a localized topological knot in an infinite geometric lattice.
What does that mean for the nature of information or even consciousness itself?
Exactly. When our specific localized order eventually fails, when the rubber of the balloon thins and our biological structure yields to entropy, is the information of who we were permanently erased in the muddy waters of decay.
Or, if we exist in a universe built entirely on perfect, recursive geometric memory, does that information simply unspool?
Does it perfectly untie, perpetually redistributing the exact geometric pattern of your existence back into the infinite background lattice of the cosmos?
It invites a profound rethinking of existence and legacy.
If TDUFT is right, the universe doesn't delete information. It just folds it back into the scaffolding. The X-ray of reality isn't broken. We just have to learn how to read the infinite geometry it's printed on.